Have you ever wondered why babies cry at night? Have you ever wondered why babies fell sick at night? Have you ever wondered why rituals happens at night? Secret societies meet at night, strong prayers are held at night. There are many more tonight than speculation. This video will educate our mothers and fathers on how they should guide their children at night. Night is not like any other day, it's a time when mysterious things happen, things you can never imagine. Before we dive into this story, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button below for more videos like this. The darkness of the night was only illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights, casting long shadows on the deserted streets of Lagos. Yuzo's mother had sent her on an errand to buy Maggi noodles from a nearby shop, and she had to navigate the quiet streets alone. As she walked, the only sound was the soft crunch of her sandals on the gravel path. Yuzo's thoughts were consumed by the delicious aroma of the noodles and the prospect of a warm meal waiting for her at home. She quickened her pace, her eyes fixed on the shop's neon sign in the distance. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. The old woman's face was shrouded in darkness, but Yuzo could sense her piercing gaze. "Child, take this," the woman said, her voice low and mysterious, as she handed Yuzo a sweet biscuit. Yuzo's instincts told her to be cautious, but her hunger and curiosity got the better of her. She took the biscuit and bit into it, savoring the sweet flavor. As she did, she felt a strange sensation coursing through her veins. The old woman vanished as suddenly as she appeared, leaving Yuzo feeling bewildered and disoriented. Yuzo continued on her way to the shop, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. As she bought the Maggi noodles and headed back home, Yuzo began to feel a creeping sense of unease. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like she was being watched. The streets seemed darker and more menacing than before. When she arrived home, Yuzo's mother was busy cooking dinner. She greeted Yuzo with a warm smile, but Yuzo's response was muted. She felt like something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As the night wore on, Yuzo's unease only grew. She couldn't sleep, and her mind was filled with strange and vivid images. She felt like she was losing control, and the darkness outside seemed to be closing in around her. And then, the first sign of trouble appeared. Yuzo's fingers began to tingle and ache, and she felt an overwhelming urge to bite. She tried to resist, but it was no use. Her body seemed to be acting on its own, and she was powerless to stop it. The consequences of that midnight encounter were only just beginning to unfold. Yuzo's life would never be the same again. Yuzo's fingers tingled and ached, and she felt an overwhelming urge to bite. She tried to resist, but her body seemed to be acting on its own. The sensation was unfamiliar and frightening, and Yuzo didn't know what was happening to her. As she struggled to control her newfound desire, she began to notice changes within herself. Her senses seemed heightened, and her reflexes quickened. She felt a strange connection to the darkness outside, as if it was calling to her. Superscript 1. The night wore on, and Yuzo's unease grew. She couldn't sleep, and her mind was filled with vivid images that seemed to dance on the edge of her consciousness. She felt like she was losing control, and the darkness outside seemed to be closing in around her. The shadows on the walls seemed to move and twist, taking on sinister shapes that watched her every move. As the hours passed, Yuzo's desire to bite grew stronger. She felt like she was being consumed by an insatiable hunger, and she didn't know how to satiate it. Her body seemed to be acting on its own, and she was powerless to stop it. She began to wonder if she was losing her mind, or if something was terribly wrong with her. The next day, Yuzo's teacher, Mrs. Okoro, noticed a change in her behavior. Yuzo seemed distant and preoccupied, and her eyes had a strange, almost feral glint. Mrs. Okoro asked Yuzo if she was okay, but Yuzo just shook her head. She didn't know how to explain what was happening to her. As the day wore on, Yuzo's desire to bite grew stronger. She felt like she was walking on edge, and she didn't know when she would lose control. She tried to focus on her lessons, but her mind kept wandering back to the strange sensation in her fingers. In class, Mrs. Okoro asked Yuzo a question, but Yuzo didn't respond. She was too caught up in her own thoughts, and she didn't hear the teacher. Mrs. Okoro reprimanded her, and Yuzo felt a surge of anger. She tried to control herself, but her emotions seemed to be simmering just below the surface. Suddenly, Yuzo's hand shot out, and she grabbed Mrs. Okoro's arm. She didn't mean to, but her body seemed to be acting on its own. Mrs. Okoro cried out in pain, and the class fell silent. Yuzo realized what she had done, and she felt a wave of horror wash over her. She had beaten her teacher, and she didn't know why. The class erupted into chaos, and Yuzo's classmates screamed and ran away. Mrs. Okoro tried to shake Yuzo off, but Yuzo's grip was tight. She seemed to be in a trance-like state, and she didn't respond to her surroundings. As the days passed, Yuzo's behavior became more erratic. She would lash out at her classmates, and she seemed to be losing control. Her parents were worried, and they didn't know what to do. They took her to see a doctor, but the doctor couldn't find anything wrong with her. The community began to talk about Yuzo, and they whispered among themselves about her strange behavior. Some people said she was possessed, while others claimed she was cursed. Yuzo's parents were at a loss, and they didn't know how to help their daughter. As the tension built, Yuzo's situation became more and more dire. She was trapped in a living nightmare, and she didn't know how to escape. Her desire to bite grew stronger, and she felt like she was losing herself to her darker impulses. The villagers began to demand that Yuzo be punished for her actions. They said she was a danger to herself and others, and they called for her to be burned alive. Yuzo's parents were torn, and they didn't know what to do. They loved their daughter, but they were afraid of what she might do. Yuzo's fate hung in the balance, and it seemed like her future was uncertain. Would she be able to control her desires, or would she succumb to her darker impulses? The suspense was palpable, and the outcome was far from certain. Superscript 2. As Yuzo stood on the edge of the precipice, she felt a sense of dread wash over her. She knew she was running out of time, and she didn't know what the future held. The darkness seemed to be closing in around her, and she felt like she was losing herself to the shadows. In the midst of the chaos, Yuzo's thoughts turned to the old woman who had given her the biscuit. She wondered if the woman had known what would happen to her, and if she had planned it all along. Yuzo's mind was filled with questions, and she didn't know where to find the answers. The only thing she knew was, as Yuzo stood on the edge of the precipice, she felt a sense of dread wash over her. The darkness seemed to be closing in around her, and she felt like she was losing herself to the shadows. The villagers' demands for her punishment grew louder, and Yuzo's parents were torn between their love for their daughter and their fear of what she might do. One night, Yuzo decided to sneak out of her house and seek answers. She had heard rumors of a local spiritualist who lived on the outskirts of the village, a woman who was said to possess the knowledge and power to help Yuzo understand her condition. Yuzo made her way through the dark alleys, her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived at the spiritualist's hut, Yuzo was met with a warm smile. The spiritualist, an elderly woman named Mama Ayo, welcomed Yuzo into her home and listened intently as Yuzo described her symptoms. Mama Ayo's eyes seemed to bore into Yuzo's soul, as if searching for the truth. "You have been bitten by the darkness," Mama Ayo declared, her voice filled with conviction. "The old woman who gave you the biscuit was not what she seemed. She was a messenger of the shadows, and you have been chosen to play a role in a much larger drama. Yuzo's mind reeled as Mama Ayo revealed the existence of a hidden world, a realm of supernatural creatures and ancient traditions. According to Mama Ayo, Yuzo's possession was just the beginning of a journey that would take her to the depths of this mysterious world. As Yuzo learned more about the hidden world, she began to experience strange and vivid visions. She saw herself walking through dense forests, surrounded by creatures that defied explanation. She saw herself standing at the edge of a great river, with waters that seemed to stretch on forever. Mama Ayo taught Yuzo how to harness her newfound powers, showing her how to control her desire to bite and how to navigate the hidden world. Yuzo's senses grew sharper, and she began to see the world in a new light. But with each step forward, Yuzo faced new challenges and dangers. The villagers grew more hostile, and Yuzo's parents began to doubt whether Mama Ayo's methods were truly helping their daughter. Yuzo's fate hung in the balance, and she knew that she had to make a choice, succumb to her darker impulses or find a way to control them. As the days passed, Yuzo's connection to the hidden world deepened. She began to realize that she was not alone in her struggles, and that there were others like her who had walked this path before. With Mama Ayo's guidance, Yuzo embarked on a journey of self-discovery, one that would take her to the very limits of her endurance. The stakes were high, and the outcome was far from certain. Would Yuzo be able to master her powers and find a way to live with her condition, or would she succumb to the darkness that seemed to be closing in around her? The suspense was palpable, and Yuzo's future hung precariously in the balance. In the midst of this turmoil, Yuzo's thoughts turned to the old woman who had given her the biscuit. She wondered if the woman had known what would happen to her, and if she had planned it all along. Yuzo's mind was filled with questions, and she didn't know where to find the answers. As she navigated the hidden world, Yuzo encountered a cast of characters who seemed to be pulling her in different directions. There was Jamila, a mysterious woman with powers that rivaled Yuzo's own. There was also Kofi, a young man who seemed to be hiding secrets of his own. Yuzo's relationships with these characters were complex and multifaceted. She felt drawn to Jamila, who seemed to understand her in ways that no one else could. But she also felt a sense of unease around Kofi, who seemed to be watching her every move. As the tension built, Yuzo realized that she was not just fighting to control her powers, but also to navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries. The hidden world was full of secrets and surprises, and Yuzo knew that she had to be careful if she wanted to survive. With each passing day, Yuzo's journey became more treacherous and more unpredictable. She faced challenges that tested her courage and her resolve, and she began to realize that she was capable of more than she ever thought possible. But as she stood at the edge of the unknown, Yuzo couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled towards a destiny that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The darkness seemed to be calling to her, and she knew that she had to answer point superscript 1. As Yuzo navigated the hidden world, she began to realize the full extent of her powers and the consequences of her actions. She had beaten her teacher, and the villagers were demanding her punishment. Yuzo's parents were torn between their love for their daughter and their fear of what she might do. Mama Ayo's guidance had helped Yuzo to understand her condition, but it had also raised new questions. Yuzo wondered if she was truly in control of her powers, or if they were controlling her. She felt like she was walking a tightrope, balancing between her desire to live a normal life and the darkness that seemed to be pulling her in. As the days passed, Yuzo's relationships with Jamila and Kofi deepened. Jamila seemed to understand Yuzo in ways that no one else could, and Yuzo felt drawn to her mysterious powers. But Kofi's secrets and motives made Yuzo wary, and she didn't know if she could trust him. The villagers' hostility towards Yuzo grew, and she began to feel like an outcast. They would whisper to each other when she passed by, and some even called for her to be banished from the village. Yuzo's parents tried to defend her, but they were increasingly worried about her behavior. One night, Yuzo had a terrifying vision. She saw herself losing control completely, biting and infecting others, and causing chaos and destruction. She woke up in a cold sweat, feeling like she was running out of time. Mama Ayo sensed Yuzo's distress and sat her down for a talk. "You are at a crossroads, Yuzo," she said. "You can choose to give in to your darker impulses, or you can fight to control them. But know this, the choice you make will have consequences, not just for yourself, but for those around you." Yuzo knew that Mama Ayo was right. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it soon. But as she looked out at the darkness gathering around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that her fate was already sealed. The stakes were high, and the outcome was far from certain. Would Yuzo be able to master her powers and find a way to live with her condition, or would she succumb to the darkness that seemed to be closing in around her? The suspense was palpable, and Yuzo's future hung precariously in the balance. As Yuzo struggled to come to terms with her condition, she began to realize that she was not alone. There were others like her, others who had walked this path before. And there were those who would stop at nothing to exploit her powers for their own gain. Yuzo's journey was fraught with danger, but she knew that she had to keep moving forward. She had to find a way to control her powers, to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that seemed to be pulling her in different directions. The darkness seemed to be calling to her, and Yuzo knew that she had to answer. But as she stood at the edge of the unknown, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled towards a destiny that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The consequences of Yuzo's actions would be far-reaching, and the outcome was far from certain. But one thing was clear, Yuzo's life would never be the